Well, good morning, everyone. Can I begin by thanking everyone across the state of New South Wales for following the instructions of the SES during this difficult time. I want to thank our state emergency services, our volunteers who have been out there over the last 72 hours working through the evening to keep people across our great state safe. It's obviously been a very difficult time for many months. To have this flood event off the back of others makes it more challenging. And once again, our SES are on the front line, day in, day out, working through the night to keep people safe. I want to continue to ask people to follow the instructions of the SES. If there's an evacuation warning in place, please get ready to evacuate. If there's an evacuation order in place, please leave immediately. These instructions, these warnings, these orders, they are not in place for the sake of it. They are there to keep you and your family safe. As we've said over the last couple of days, simply because of a past experience with a flood event does not mean that that will be the experience this time around. So experiences in the past do not necessarily mean that the flood event will be the same, and therefore there could be a worse situation that you find yourselves in. So please continue to follow those instructions. I want to thank everybody who has been, and particularly those in northwest Sydney, where there's been a number of evacuation warnings and orders in place. Over the last few days, there has been 116 flood rescues. Since 9 p.m. last night, we have had 83 flood rescues, as well as 1,593 requests for assistance. So there is substantial effort on the ground with our SES teams working through the night. I want to thank them again for what they've been doing, but please make their life easier by following those instructions that are there. Please, we say this every flood event, please don't drive through floodwaters. Once again, we don't say that for the sake of it. We say that to keep you safe. And after every flood event, we have a number of flood rescues and sometimes deaths that take place because people don't follow that instruction and they drive through floodwaters. And people drive through floodwaters because they can't see the depth of the road beneath. That you cannot appreciate how deep that water is. Please do not drive through floodwaters. It'll keep you and your family safe and ensure the SES and other volunteers don't have to put their life on the line to keep you safe. We currently, across New South Wales, have 64 evacuation warnings in place and 71 evacuation orders. That is impacting 32,000 people across New South Wales. So there are a number of people who are impacted by these evacuation orders and these evacuation warnings. We probably expect to see that number increase over the course of the week. I also want to thank our ADF for the work that they are doing on the ground. We currently have 100 ADF personnel based in northwest Sydney, and we put a request in for 100 more. Brigadier Lording is here today, and he will speak to the work and the effort that they are putting on the ground. I want to thank the coordination between the state government and the Commonwealth government during this period of time. Finally, many of you will be made aware of a bulk carrier, the Portland Bay, that is anchored without power, 1 nautical mile off Gary Beach. Currently, the Commonwealth government is trying to lift 8 non-essential crew from that bulk carrier. We have dispatched here in New South Wales a small tug, and a larger tug is now on the way from Port Botany. It's obviously a very precarious position. Our thoughts are with those who are on board, but the New South Wales government is continuing to work with Commonwealth agencies to ensure that situation is rectified as quickly as possible, and ensuring that all 21 crew on board are lifted to safety as quickly as possible. I'm now going to pass to the Deputy Premier, Paul Toole, to provide some further information in relation to the flood response. The Flood Recovery and Emergency Services Minister, Steph Cook, will then speak. Jane Golding will then give us an update in relation from the Bureau in terms of the situation overnight and what to expect as we move forward. SES Commissioner Carleen York will then provide further information in relation to the SES response, and then Brigadier Lording will provide some information in relation to the work the ADF is doing on the ground. And once again, can I thank them for the work they've done over the last few days. Paul.
Well, thanks, Premier. Look, obviously with the flooding events that we're seeing right now, it's a very heartbreaking and distressing time for so many people, not only in Sydney, but also across regional communities. And when we have a look at the flooding right now in the Sydney Basin, those people in Hawkesbury and the Camden areas, they've actually faced flooding now on multiple occasions. And I think it's a stark reminder for a lot of our regional communities that were impacted by flooding in March of this year, that we saw some of the very darkest days in those communities. But there's a very strong message here that whilst we're helping those communities to recover, the New South Wales Government will stand side by side with those communities as we help them to recover and to rebuild from the flooding events that we have seen. I do encourage people, if they are going on holidays, to put their holiday travels off at the moment. Wait for these weather events to have passed before they start taking a holiday break. I also want to thank our police and our emergency service personnel for the work that they have been undertaking as well. And it's a very strong reminder to everybody out there. If you are seeing floodwaters, stay right away from them. You do not know what lies underneath. You do not know how deep it is. You do not know how fast it is flowing, and it can actually change to be deadly very quickly. I also think that, people, if they're in a car, on a bike, even if they're onlookers, stay away from floodwaters. Because if you are caught up in our floodwaters, not only are you putting your life at risk, but you're also putting the lives of our emergency service personnel lives at risk as well. I want to say thank you again to all of those that have been hearing all the advice that has been provided and also acting upon evacuation orders as they have been given. I think there's a very simple message. If you see floodwaters, forget about it, stay right away.
Well, thank you, Premier and Deputy Premier. It's most certainly been a long 3 days since this flooding event began across New South Wales, and I'm afraid to say that we're not quite out of the woods yet, and we'll shortly hear from Jane Golding in terms of where the weather situation is up to and what people across Western Sydney and up through the Hunter and other regions can expect over the couple of the hours ahead and also the days ahead. So as has been mentioned this morning, we've got around about 30,000 people who are the subject of either an evacuation order or an evacuation warning, and really want to acknowledge the impact that these latest floods are having on those communities of impact. For many communities, this is the fourth flood that they have seen in less than 18 months. And some of those images are truly heartbreaking, seeing people's homes, their lives turned upside down again, and their livelihoods very much impacted. And so our heart very much goes out to people and communities at this time, and want to reassure those communities that we will be there with them right through the recovery process. We've clearly demonstrated that in relation to those significant flooding events that we saw earlier this year and the ongoing recovery efforts in the Northern Rivers region, and whatever is required through the Western Sydney and other areas, we will be there through that recovery time and to ensure that people get back on their feet as quickly as possible. So we currently have 7 evacuation centres that have been established, and I'd really encourage anyone who needs to somewhere to go at this time, or if you just don't feel that staying at home is where you would like to be. You may be vulnerable for any number of reasons. We have established 7 evacuation centres in the most high-risk areas. So they are at Canley Vale, Castle Hill, Gosford, Gymea, Narellan, North Richmond and Richmond. Further details can be found on the SES website of those specific locations, or you can always call the SES on 132500 or Services New South Wales on 1377 88, and we will be there to help you. We currently have 184 registrations at those evacuation centres that have been established, and we have 68 people in emergency accommodation presently. And finally, with my hat on as the Minister for Flood Recovery, I just want to give an update that where it is safe and appropriate to do so, we are kickstarting the recovery process. Working very closely with the Commonwealth at this time, and we do expect those natural disaster declarations to flow through either later today or early tomorrow morning. And we have SES crews deployed across communities in the the Georges River area at the moment, and they are beginning their rapid damage assessments, looking at the impact of this latest flooding on people's homes, their businesses, and the local infrastructure, working closely with councils, of course, to make sure that that is all captured, and that will form the basis of our discussions with the federal government in relation to rolling out support for communities as we look to get people back on their feet. And I'll now hand over to Jane Golding for a weather update.
Thanks, Minister. So in the last 24 hours, some locations have received upwards of 100 millimetres, and those areas are really stretching from Maitland in Newcastle down towards Brogers Creek in the Illawarra. Some locations have received upwards of 150 millimetres, and that's indicative of how much moisture is in the atmosphere and what some locations will see again today. So we are still seeing a steady stream of showers tracking in to the central New South Wales coast. So at the moment, the focus area is very much along the Illawarra through Sydney into the Blue Mountains and the central coast area. And as mentioned, yeah, we're expecting that accumulation of rainfall for some locations to be very high again today. So that's on top of hundreds of millimetres that these areas have received over the last 2 to 3 days. The system that's been generating this weather does show signs that it will ease tomorrow, but throughout today, expect more rain. The East Coast low tracked across the coast last night, but that coastal trough, which is really what started all this rain back on Friday, Saturday, that still will remain today. We did see some strong winds overnight affect the land areas, so around the 100 kilometre per hour mark in some locations, and those winds are still affecting our coastal areas, our marine areas off the coast. So we've still got gale force warnings out over marine areas for anyone considering going out in boats today. It's quite dangerous. The waves that this system has generated as well are still up around 5 metres, so we could see some coastal erosion again today. The rivers have been responding to this rain, and some new flood warnings went out during the overnight hours. So we've now got flood warnings out for the Patterson-Williams as well as the Wallumbri Brook. So the Patterson-Williams, thankfully, only at minor at moment. Wallumbri Brook and Lower Hunter up to moderate. But again, the key focus for riverine flooding today is still the Hawkesbury Nepean. So Menangle, they saw that peak close to the April 21 flood event late Saturday night. Waters are still up around in the major flood level mark for the Menangle area. That water did move downstream and affect North Richmond last night. They received levels similar to what they saw in March 21, and we are expecting major flooding to commence for Windsor this afternoon and Lower Portland before it moves further downstream to Sackville and Wiseman's Ferry tomorrow. So the floodwaters are high, the water's flowing really quickly, it's dangerous out on the rivers, and we do have some more rain to fall, which means the flash flood risk is not over yet either. Looking into the longer term, just quickly before I hand over to Commissioner York to take you through what they've been seeing as far as impacts out there and the SES response. We are expecting more, although the rain rates should start to decrease through the Sydney Illawarra area later today or overnight, and probably on the Central Coast Hunter by Wednesday. We are expecting continued rain along the New South Wales, or continued shower activity along the New South Wales coast for the remainder of the week. And that just means that the catchments, they're not drying out. And so any follow-up systems that we get over the next couple of weeks, we are still in East Coast low season, means the flood risk does remain, and we are asking just for a heightened level of awareness as far as what's going on with the weather at the moment. And with that, I'll hand over to Commissioner York. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're not out of the danger yet in this significant weather event. As the Premier said, there's been a large number of requests for assistance and flood rescues over the last, particularly overnight in the last 72 hours. So I'd remind people, please make sensible decisions that keep you and your family safe, and also sensible decisions that don't put the rescuers' lives at risk as well in responding to your requests for assistance. Been lots of storm damage. Obviously, these winds have brought trees down and done roof damage, which the SES and our partner agencies are responding to as well. As spoken about, some of the areas will be going into recovery, and so I just remind people that where you are able to go back in your homes, just do it with safety. There's still electrical problems, there might be damage to buildings, trees, and just make sure that you're aware of the risks as you return to those properties when it is safe to do so. There are a large number of warnings out. An evacuation warning means that your area, your buildings are at risk of being flooded. So that's the time to think about an emergency kit that you can take with you, which is important documentation, insurance documents, medication, make decisions about where you might go, ring family and friends, and be prepared that if you're the subject of an evacuation order, you are ready to leave the premises. So an evacuation order is because your premises are at risk of being flooded. Please follow those directions and please leave when we say so. You may not see the water around you, but it does mean often that the roads, the evacuation routes that you have to leave on will be cut. So it's important that you follow our directions when we give you that time, and there'll be various ways through the media. You might get an evacuation alert, you might get door knocked in relation to the risk. So it was also spoken about travel. It is school holidays. Please avoid any essential travel. If you do have to travel, please expect that you will have delays. There's a lot of roads cut, a lot of access routes that are cut, and there's a lot of detours in place. So make sure you are equipped for a longer than normal travel if you do have to travel, but we do ask you to stay off the roads where it is possible. So again, our New South Wales SES is out there responding to the community, 132 500 if you need us, or 000 if it is life-threatening. We're working with police and other emergency service agencies to respond to your requests for assistance as quickly as possible to make sure that we can get you into a safe location. So keep up to date on our website, on the BOM website. Look at live traffic if you are in a location where you have to travel. All of those resources are there to give you the most up-to-date information so that you, again, can make those safe decisions. And where you don't have to travel, please avoid doing so. It's quite dangerous on the roads. You can often not see the depth or the speed of the rivers that are flowing across roads, and it doesn't take much to lift a vehicle and move it off the road into dangerous circumstances. So please be aware of the surroundings. We have another at least 24 hours to go before we hear that the rains may subside. But the ground is saturated, the rivers are fast flowing, the dams are overflowing, so it's particularly dangerous out there, particularly in the Hawkesbury-Nepean. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank those community members who have followed our directions, who have listened to the warnings and have made sensible, safe decisions to ensure that they and their family are safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. Good morning. The RDF has received a request under the Commonwealth Disaster Recovery Plan to provide support to New South Wales. At this stage, we've got 2 rotary wing search and rescue aircraft that are available. They specialise in nighttime rescue, and they will be available, or have been available now for the last 24 hours and will remain on call. In addition, we've currently got a company-sized group of about 100 people who've worked overnight closely with the SES at McGrath's Hill to conduct a number of activities, including sandbagging, checking weather gauges, and doing door knocks to provide information to the local communities. Over the course of the next 24 hours, we'll be prepared to generate another company-sized group. We also have other elements that are being prepared should the request come through. I would say that the ADF is committed to supporting the New South Wales agencies. We work very closely with the SES and New South Wales Police. Increasingly, we are seamless in the way that that operation occurs. It allows us to get on the ground and to be able to provide that support in relatively quick time. We're available and will continue to support the community in New South Wales. Thank you.
Questions?
Can we get some more information on this bulk carrier and the concerns that it might run aground or what's the situation?
Yes, good morning. As the Premier said, a 150-metre vessel, the Portland Bay, a Hong Kong registered vessel, departed Wollongong this morning. About 7:30 this morning, the New South Wales Police Force was notified that the vessel had lost power and was drifting towards the cliffs of the Royal National Park, Guatemala area. The current situation is that that vessel is now double anchored about 1 kilometre east of the Royal National Park, and there is a tugboat on its way that should be there now actually that is assisting in pointing the bow of the vessel out to sea, which will reduce the chances of it being further pushed towards the cliffs. There is another tugboat which is apparently 2.5 to 3 hours away, which will have the capacity to be able to pull the vessel further out to coast. There are 21 crew members on board, and there was thought of airlifting some of those crew members off the vessel. I have spoken to the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, which has indicated that they believe that it's unsafe to do that at this present time, and they've delayed that rescue mission.
Are you worried it's going to hit the cliff face at the Royal National Park, or is the double anchor, from what you can see so far, doing its job?
So from what I'm advised, the double anchor plus the vessel there that's pointing it out to sea and the arrival of the pending arrival of the additional tugboat should prevent it from heading further to sea. It is unladen at the time, or what's known as, I forget the terminology for it, but it only has its own power, fuel and oil on board, so it's not laden at the moment, so that should make it easier for the vessels to tow further out to sea.
Are the conditions preventing, are there concerns that the conditions could prevent the tugboat from doing its job?
No, at this stage, my understanding is that the tugboat that is being sent there has the capacity to be able to tow it further out to sea, and obviously the Australian Maritime Safety Authority will then coordinate the resources needed to get it underway under its own power.
Premier, where do we stand in terms of declaring a state of emergency, and are there any disaster payments available to people?
Well, obviously the main focus right now is our response, immediate response, and continuing to make sure we protect property and protect lives. Now we've stood up SEOC here at Homebush, is exactly what we do in circumstance where we want a whole of government coordinated response. But it's not just the New South Wales government that has a coordinated response. It's been very pleasing to be able to work with the Commonwealth government to have ADF support on the ground immediately, providing essential support, going from door to door, providing instructions, providing advice to those people who are flood affected. So this is a coordinated response, not just from New South Wales, but with the Commonwealth government as well. That's incredibly pleasing. And I just ask again, the instructions we provide aren't there for the sake of it. They're there to keep you and your family safe. When we have over 30,000 people across New South Wales at the moment affected by an evacuation order or an evacuation warning, we really do need people to follow those instructions. And over the last 24 hours particularly, I want to thank everybody who has done that, because that doesn't just keep you and your family safe, it also protects our SES, our ADF, our people on the ground who put their lives at risk to keep you safe.
Can we get a sense of what's happened at North Richmond and what's coming for Windsor?
From a response or from a river perspective?
Yeah, and also what's happened with properties on the ground, like what's...
Yeah, so I don't have the exact river heights for you, unfortunately, but the timing of the river at North Richmond is expected to stay high for some time and above that major threshold. So it does look like with this rain continuing, it won't recede below major today, and that those floodwaters are now continuing to move downstream towards Richmond, where we're expecting major flood levels there later this afternoon.
So is Windsor the main concern this afternoon, Windsor itself?
For deterioration, yes, but there are locations that are already seeing really high flood levels, which will stay high for some time.
Would Windsor match what we saw in March this year and March last year?
Yes, that's right. It looks in the ballpark of about the same. Yep.
So are river levels and rainfall totals getting close to breaking records?
So we're running some stats on that at the moment, but we have seen quite a few locations, particularly around the Hawkesbury Nepean area, see more than they'd normally see for July and more than they've seen before in July. So some locations, and sorry I don't have the exact names, but have seen more than double, more than 3 times, 4 times what they would normally see in an average July, just in a couple of days' time.
It's unusual to see flooding like this in the middle of winter, isn't it?
No, this is our East Coast low season, so the amount of rainfall that we've seen in this event is comparable to previous events. June 2007 was a pretty bad East Coast low season. June 2011 was another one. So we do see these rainfall rates. Unfortunately, we do see these systems affect the New South Wales coast. The numbers they're comparable to what we saw in March. What's a little bit different with this event in the Sydney area is whereas the rainfall numbers over March we stacked up over 7 days, say, it was we're seeing really high rainfall rates on individual days, and that just increases the potential for the rivers to respond really quickly.
This one for the Commissioner or the Premier. In terms of resources that have been deployed to Richmond and Windsor today, what are you doing on the ground?
So we've allocated a large number of additional resources to go out to the Hawkesbury Nepean areas of Windsor and Richmond. We are working with the ADF as well to make sure that we can do door knocking and sandbagging to assist those premises that aren't affected as well. And obviously we've got our other emergency service personnel out there as well. So we've sent resources from out of area to assist those units in the high risk areas to ensure that we can meet the community's requests for assistance when they need us.
And you did speak about the Hunter Valley earlier, Maitland, that sort of area. Is that going to miss the brunt of it, do you think?
I might hand to Jane in a moment, but just there we have opened up our zone office 24/7 to be able to respond to any future risk. It is forecasted this low will move towards the Hunter Newcastle area over the next 24, 48 hours, and we will ensure that we've got the resources. So we've been planning up there. We've got other emergency service agencies working out as liaison officers in our command centre and preparing for what might come. We've already started community engagement because it's really important to get the message out to those communities about what they can do to prepare in light of the rains coming. The additional issues we have, not only in the Hunter but also across the Hawkesbury Nepean, is different to some previous years, but not the last 18 months, is the saturation levels of the ground, the inability of the water to soak in, and the capacity of the dams, particularly around the Sydney metropolitan area, but other areas are up around 100%. So there is no give in the system, it's just flowing into our river systems, and obviously the extreme amount of rain leads to a higher risk in relation to flash flooding as well. So for those Hunter residents, now's the time to get ready and be aware and keep in contact with the warnings and messages that we're putting out in various ways.
Just for the Premier. So communities like Camden, Windsor, Richmond, they've seen 4 floods in less than 18 months. Yeah. Is it time to rethink the future of some of these areas when we're barely recovering from the last flood and we're seeing this once again?
Look, I think that would be premature. I mean, what we're focused today on is making sure we keep people safe. That is our sole focus today, and it will be over the course of the week and beyond if necessary. As we've said, we expect further rain today, flash flooding to occur in many parts of Sydney, southwest Sydney, northwest Sydney. It's been a very difficult time right across our state when it comes to flooding. Particularly in the northwest region around the Hawkesbury River and Windsor and those areas of Sydney who have not just seen flooding events like this occur once, but numerous times. But ultimately, our focus is to make sure we keep people safe and that we preserve people's property. And that is our focus today. We work through all those issues down the track. In relation to the broader issue of the Northern Rivers, for example, that review is currently underway. I expect to get that report back shortly. I'll review that, I'll make that public. But you know, our focus today, right now, is on our response and making sure we keep people safe. And the best way that community can help us with that is follow those instructions. And as I say, we say this numerous times in these press conferences. We say it time and time again because what we do see is people continue to drive through floodwaters. People continue to not follow the evacuation orders because they base their response on previous events. You can never base your response on previous events. Base your response on the instructions that are provided by the SES. If there is an evacuation order in place, please leave immediately. Please don't drive through floodwaters, and please follow the instructions of the SES.
Can we estimate how many homes have been impacted by floodwaters so far? You said around 30,000 people impacted by evacuation.
We'll get you. I'll take that on notice, and we'll get you that.
Have you spoken to the Province?
No, not at this stage, but the Commonwealth Minister will be here today, which is incredibly pleasing that they're coming down to visit CEOC today and be part of the coordinated New South Wales response. And I think the fact that we already have 100 troops on the ground is incredibly pleasing. As I said, it's not just a coordinated response from New South Wales, but Commonwealth and the state government.
But nothing from Anthony Albanese?
No, but the Commonwealth Minister has been engaging and he will be here today on the ground in our operations centre, and that's a really pleasing effort. Not at this stage, but I don't see an issue with that, where our emergency services ministers are working very closely together in relation to this, and he will be here today. And that's, I think that shows you the fact that you've now got agencies right across the board working together in relation to this issue, and that's incredibly pleasing.
Okay, last questions, everybody.
Do we reach the notion of a 1 in 100 year flood now, given we've had 4 in 18 months?
Perhaps, perhaps. I mean, we're seeing these flood events more regularly. There is no doubt about that. Whether it's in the Northern Rivers, where in 2017 we had a major flood that we hadn't seen for years, to then have that occur twice again at the start of this year. To see what we're seeing right across Sydney, there's no doubt these events are becoming more common, and governments need to adjust and make sure that we respond to the changing environment that we find ourselves in. And we need to make sure we build communities in a resilient way, that we learn from the past and make sure when it comes to our response that it's better. And one thing I can say, and probably goes to Chris's question, is in relation to engagement with the Commonwealth. I think the fact that we've had the Commonwealth and the ADF on the ground straight away is incredibly pleasing. And I think you can certainly see that's something that has improved, in my view, from the last flooding events that we had earlier in the year. So we can always learn from events of the past to make sure we do better in the future.
Just on another issue before you go, have you initiated Fair Work proceedings against the RTBU ahead of the strike this week?
Yeah, at 10:30 today we'll be seeking orders to stop industrial action. And the actions of the RTBU are incredibly disappointing. This has gone on for years. We have worked in good faith, but been a fair and reasonable response from the New South Wales government to resolve these issues. I don't want to see any person across our state inconvenienced by these industrial actions that have been taking place. We have done everything we can to a point where we agreed last week, based on the numerous discussions that have taken place, to have modifications made to the best trains you could have in the world. We procured the best trains. The national regulator says that those trains are safe. We made that concession because I want to make sure those trains are on the tracks as quickly as possible for the people of our state. The response of the RTBU, in my view, was purely political. To continue industrial action, particularly this week as well, where we know that there are severe weather warnings right across our state. We want to encourage, obviously at this time, many people to be using public transport rather than being on the roads. at this time. But to continue industrial action shows a lack of good faith. My job as Premier of the state is to balance all the competing needs up. I know there will always be, the union bosses will always have a view. I accept that. And my job is to make sure that we work very closely to get the best resolution for the people of New South Wales. And that's exactly what we have done. But when it gets to the point where this is all about politics from the unions, our job is to put our people first. We'll be seeking those orders today in the Fair Work Commission. We'll be seeking to get a hearing in relation to those matters at the Fair Work Commission to stop industrial action. That will mean, in circumstances where there are areas that we can agree on, but where those areas have not been agreed, there'll be arbitration.
But do you take the point that they just want a signed agreement that you're actually going to modify the trains? Because it was only a couple of weeks ago that your Industrial Relations Minister stood up and said, oh, we're actually not going to do that, even though there was negotiations happening. So there's been a lot of...
I'm the Premier of the state. Actually, I'm the Premier of the state. I've said we've made a commitment to modify the trains. We've said that publicly. We're making that commitment. It should be part of the enterprise agreement. That's where the discussions have been. This is a political ploy from the union bosses to ensure that industrial action continues. We want to cease the industrial action. And I say to the unions today, you need to put the people of New South Wales first. That is our job. Our job is to look after our people and get those trains on the tracks as quickly as possible. We're in a situation here in New South Wales, and give Chris O'Keefe a big shout out here because he's been saying it. We have the highest pay rises of any state in the country at 3%. It is a material fact that is being lost in the debate. At 3% and at 3.5% next year, there is no other state that is paying those increases than the New South Wales government. And we've done that because that's a fair and reasonable response at a difficult time economically for everybody across our state. We have 10% of people in New South Wales are in the public sector. 90% are not. Now, we've had public sector wages here in New South Wales increase at a greater rate than private sector wages for a decade. My job as Premier is to balance the competing needs to make sure I can continue to invest in frontline services, the best healthcare, the best education, the best public transport. That's what we have to balance. That's what we have to balance up. What we saw under the old days was union bosses taking control of the New South Wales budget, and that's what happens under Labor. Labor and union bosses taking control of the budget, and that means less investment in frontline services and less investment in infrastructure. That's what we've seen in the past. That cannot continue into the future. And I'm not going to allow for that to happen here in our state. I have to balance those competing needs in a difficult situation. I note the Reserve Bank Governor has said that that all wages should have a 3 in front of it. That's exactly what we've done here in New South Wales. It's exactly what we've done. No other state has matched our public sector wages. Yet surprisingly, it's only in New South Wales where this large-scale industrial action continues to take place. We've said a lot during the pandemic of we're all in this together. Well, we're all in this together in the good times and the difficult times. And these are difficult times for our state, our nation, and globally. And we need to work responsibly to get an outcome that is fair and reasonable. And that's exactly what we've done here in New South Wales, yet still, this large-scale industrial action for political purposes designed to hurt our people continues. It must stop.
Besides the Fair Work Commission action, are you going to meet with Alex Plassens this week?
Yes.
What do you hope to actually achieve by meeting face-to-face?
An agreement. An agreement, but one way or another, it has to stop. And that's why we're going to the Fair Work Commission. We'll be seeking orders in the Fair Work Commission. Because in the discussions I've had with Alex Plassens, it's been about modifications to the trains. I've made it very clear that we will modify those trains at taxpayer expense, even though it's not necessary, to get those trains on the tracks to help the people of New South Wales and give the best service possible. I've made that concession because by having them not on the tracks, the cost to the state would continue to escalate over time. So when you go through those discussions, you then make that commitment that the union bosses then sit there and say, no, actually, we're going to continue this action to inconvenience mums and dads right across our state is completely unacceptable, and it is wrong, and it needs to be called out, and it needs to stop. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
David Elliott said he was close to shredding the enterprise agreement, which offers these, as you say, other generous entitlements. Does that threat still stand?
Well, but that's really not a matter for us. This is the way this is going. It's going to be in the Fair Work Commission. So that's really out of our hands now. We have worked in good faith. We have worked in good faith for a substantial period of time. And to get to a point last week where you agree that you're going to modify the trains, a substantial concession that should not be necessary, but we agree to do it in the best interest of the people of our state, and the union boss says, no, we're continuing industrial action, is unacceptable and it's wrong. And I've made the stand I've made today because this needs to end. It needs to end now. And I'd say to the union bosses and the Labor Party, stop putting politics before our people. Because this concerted campaign that was called out on the front page of the Daily Telegraph at the start of this year, the year of the strike, is a concerted political campaign to put our people last. Well, that is unacceptable. I'm not going to stand for it as Premier. This action must end. This action must end. There needs to be a fair and reasonable response from the union bosses, an understanding and an appreciation that everyone across our state is doing it tough, that we've gone through a very difficult health crisis and economic crisis, that we are going into a high inflationary environment. Interest rates may rise, expected to rise again tomorrow. That doesn't just affect the public service. That affects everybody across the state. Every one of our people, our 8 million people across New South Wales, are finding it to be a challenging time, just like they are all around the country. But the funding that comes for public sector wages doesn't come from me. It comes from mums and dads and families across our state who pay taxes. And how unfair it is on them, who are not earning wages at the same rate as the public sector, for the public sector to be demanding that everybody else pays for them to have a substantial increase at their expense. Well, I'm not going to stand for that. We're all in this together. And at 3% and 3.5%, we have the most generous pay increases in the nation. We lead the way. And you would have thought in the lead up to the budget, when I was asked at press conference after press conference in relation to this issue, what would we do? And we adjusted it in the budget. No other state or territory has done that. Yet the strikes still continue. And I think the public have worked it out. So what I say to the union bosses today, stop the industrial action. Take a broader perspective. And to the members, have a broader perspective. That of the 8 million people across our state, everyone is doing it tough. And they will continue to do it tough in a high inflationary environment when interest rates increase. But what you can't do, as Bill Kilty has pointed out, from the ACTU has pointed out, you increase wages, then all of a sudden you start chasing your tail when it comes to inflation. We are taking the right approach, the fair and reasonable approach in a very difficult time, and everybody should be working together in appreciating the circumstance we find ourselves in, and also appreciating, so we're all in it together, that we shouldn't be inconveniencing our parents, our school children, our commuters, our small businesses. There are small businesses affected. There are small businesses affected every day who have we've had small businesses close for months during the pandemic. Couldn't make a dollar during the pandemic. And those small businesses rely on public transport every day, so many of them. And the security of the public sector and the insecurity of many of those small businesses across the state, please think of them. Please think of the inconvenience you're causing them. Please realise that the support that we are providing here as a state is fair and reasonable. It's above private sector wages. It's above pay rises in any other state or territory across the nation. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Too much noise. Steph, I could hear, brother. Rumble.